Welcome to Tech Talks. I'm your host, Jack Brandwood, and this is the podcast where I speak to some of the brightest and most influential people in the tech industry in the UK. This week, I sit down with CTO and co-founder of Arctic Shores, Safe Hammad. Our conversation ranges from Safe's approach to leadership, the opportunity cost of a wrong hire, and the many benefits of having a co-founder.
You need to share in your joys as well. And actually, if you do that by yourself, it's like visiting somewhere by yourself and you want to turn around and say, whoa, look at there's no one there to share in. And also share in sort of, any setbacks you have as well.
For more information on this episode and Tech Talks, head over to tact-it.co.uk. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the episode. Hi, Safe. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks. It's great to be on. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And loving the polo.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Any chance to advertise?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Well, look, I always like to start with the question. Again, it's very philosophical, but who is Safe?
Oh, gosh. Yes. Well, I'm the CTO and the co-founder of a company called Arctic Shores in Manchester. I can talk about Arctic Shores and talk about myself. Let's start with Arctic Shores, maybe. We're all about hiring for potential, helping customers see past the CV when they're looking for candidates to fill their roles, and to sort of put aside looking at the experience on the CV, looking at what university they went to, what grades they got, and actually thinking, does that person have the qualities to be successful in our company? That's me as the CTO and co-founder. Who's Safe? I'm a bit of a techie actually, and so I'm someone who loves to program computers. I'm passionate about mentoring those that program computers as well. In my spare time, I pretend to, I suppose, play music a bit and play the piano. That's what I do for fun.
Incredible. Wow, what a fantastic intro. Look, we always like to start with, I think I told you, but Tact's vision is to create a world where everyone gets their dream job. So kind of aligned slightly, but it had to start somewhere. You weren't always a CTO and co-founder, so I need to ask you to draw me what you wanted to be when you were growing up. And are you a good artist?
Not particularly.
No. Okay. Great.
Right. Okay. Am I being viewed drawing this? Or am I,
slightly.
Right, okay.
If you can talk us through it as you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting one. I mean, you get asked this. Okay, I don't get asked this so much anymore, but you get asked occasionally. What did you want to be when you grow up? And the real answer is this, because I actually hadn't the faintest idea what I wanted to do. Which we can get into, which is why I fell into a particular career which didn't necessarily suit me. But if I'm being honest with myself, and some of the ideas that I harbored in terms of what I thought I would end up being, even though I wasn't necessarily passionate about, I'd say it was more like this. And I'm not going to draw it particularly well, but let's have a look. And here's the lab coat, like that. Oh, and there's the question mark. Maybe we can turn that into buttons. And I haven't drawn it very well, but anyway, this is a lab coat. I should put some arms in there.
Sure.
There we go. That'll do. I thought I wanted to be a mad scientist. And the scientist piece wasn't that important. I'd say the mad piece was. For some reason, it was the mad and the scientist, and I wanted my hair up there. And
Let's just show everybody. If you're just listening, definitely check the video out because that's an incredible drawing.
I loved science at school. And there are loads of subjects I loved at school: science, maths. I loved languages. But I thought science is where I'd end up. But I didn't know what aspect of science. So I thought the idea of being a mad scientist sounded great to me.
Wow, incredible. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in North Wales, so I don't know whether you call it the Northwest, like in Manchester, but not too far away. A town called Colwyn Bay, you might have heard of, right on the coast. It was a great upbringing.
Yeah, beautiful place. And you mentioned you're into sciences. What were you like as a kid?
A little bit nerdy. I was definitely sporty as well, and again loved my music. But I was ultimately a bit nerdy at school. I can't say that I was good at doing my work or my homework or anything like that, but I loved my lessons and loved school and academics. So I suppose that's me.
So you mentioned there you didn't really know what you wanted to do when you were growing up. So what was the journey from, being into science, that sort of thing, into where you are now?
Sure. So I ended up applying and studying medicine at university. So I did 6 years of a medical degree. And it's an interesting one. My parents have a medical background, so I knew about medicine. It was almost an obvious choice that, it was almost a case of, I think I might want to do medicine, but if I don't start now, how am I going to get back into it? So I thought, well, I'll go for it. And there's a couple of things there. I was a bit young for my year, so I would have been 16 where I had to make that choice. And looking back, I think I was a little bit young to make that choice. I don't have any regrets about studying it, but it's 6 years heading in a direction where I didn't necessarily want to end up. The other thing was, when I was applying, I'm not going to say what year, but if you look at the economy, it wasn't that great. Unemployment was high. It's quite similar to, at the moment, unemployment's not high now, but we're entering a recession. And actually, being a doctor at the time felt like a good option in the face of the economic climate at the time.
Right, okay. So, and what was the light bulb moment and you thought, this isn't for me? What happened?
Probably in the first term.
Right, wow, so early on.
It was early on, but I stuck out the 6 years. And the amazing thing about medicine, and the amazing thing about I suppose the medics that you will encounter, whether it be in a hospital or out in the community, is there are so many different branches of medicine. You can be a surgeon or a medic, and you can be interested in different parts of the body, and they're all actually very different. So within this one mega field called medicine, you can find your niche. So actually, as I did the course, there were certain niches that I thought, actually maybe I could see myself doing this. And other niches where I thought, no, this definitely isn't for me. And that's normal for any medic. So I stuck it out for the 6 years, actually. Always had this doubt in my mind, is this the right thing? But it was actually when I was applying for my first medical posts as a junior doctor in the hospital. And I actually had the form in front of me and I had a pen in my hand and I thought to myself, I can't do this. and stubborn as I was back then, I just didn't.
Yeah, that's incredible staying power that you were so unsure from the first term and you stuck out for 6 years. Yeah, why?
Good question. I suppose partly finishing something that I'd started. I'd gone down this path, I'd chosen it, and I suppose part of me wanted to stick it out. As I say, if it was a no-brainer, really obvious that this was wrong for me, I'd have left it. It wouldn't have been right for me to stay on. But I knew there was a chance, and therefore I had to see it through. And until you see it through, you don't really know what the outcome's going to be. And it was only at the end, after I finished, that I knew what the outcome was. And frankly, I had fun at university. Part of university life for me was just growing as a person ultimately. So it was great. I didn't want to leave that behind. I suppose I wasn't ready to know what else I was going to do. So for right or for wrong, I stayed on that path until I knew what else it was that I was going to do. Having said that, even when I got to the end, I still didn't know what it was that I wanted to do. But
incredibly admirable, and yeah, wow. And so, what was your road into technology from there?
After I left medical school, I tried playing the piano and singing for a bit, and played in a couple of bars, it was fun for a while. But I'm not quite sure I was good enough. We even released a single, and I'm glad I did it. But actually, it was tough, really tough, tougher than medical school. And I sort of stopped enjoying it. So I knew that wasn't for me. But it was a friend of mine who turned up one day in his very smart suit and turned up in his brand new car, his Ford Fiesta, and said, I've got this job as a computer programmer. And I was looking at him and it's like, programming computers? And it's like, yeah, programming computers. Now, I was very lucky. My parents bought me, or the family, I suppose, a Sinclair ZX81 back in 1981. And I'm not quite sure, I should ask them actually why they did that. But it was like, here you go. And I loved it. I would have the manuals that told you how to program and how to sort of work this computer. And it was religious just going through it, learning how to program, just enjoying it, lapping up, wanting more and more information. So there I was programming all this time and not knowing that there was a whole industry out there where you could program and it would be a job and you'd be paid for it. So when he told me that, it was like, you're kidding me. You can program and you'll be paid for it and you have a job. It's like, yes. And that was it. Never looked back. And so got into IT from there.
Wow, so a very untraditional route or non-traditional route into technology. It's not as common that people just go straight through university, straight into a career in technology anymore. So it's you got the camps, you've got self-taught people? I'm not sure people necessarily do 6 years of medical school, go and play pianos in bars, and then all of a sudden they go into technology.
Us, yeah.
Yeah, a very small percentage. But yeah, so how did you get that first job? What was that like?
So interestingly, again, it comes back to, I suppose, naivety and not knowing how the world of work works. And you can say that of anyone that age, actually. It's really hard to know how to start your career, how to get onto that ladder. And so, again, this friend of mine said, look, the way I got into it was to go on a course to learn how to program. Now, I knew how to program, but this was a particular sort of programming language and skill that was really required in the industry at the time. A computer called the IBM AS400, if anybody's geeky out there and wants to hear about that. Interestingly, their model was that they were also a recruitment company. So as you did this 8-week course, hopefully by week 4 or week 5, they'll have paired you up with a company. And that's exactly what happened to me. The interesting thing is you mentioned how, not needing a sort of an IT background or a sort of a computing qualification, it isn't a thing anymore. I think we've come full circle. I suppose around the time I was looking for roles, actually doing computer science, I think, even earlier than that, computer science wasn't even a degree. But doing computer science or getting into computing at university wasn't the done thing at all. And then we've gone through a phase where, oh yes, I'll do a computer science degree because I want to get into computing. And you're absolutely right, it's brilliant. We've come full circle where all you need is the enthusiasm and the potential to do it. And actually going on to various courses or boot camps, some of whom do work as recruitment consultants at the same time, can get you into the field. And that's brilliant. Yeah,
absolutely. It's just a kind of passing down the ladder for the next generation, and doing everything you possibly can. And now, obviously, co-founded Arctic Shores, which, by the way, congratulations on the recent investment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not too sure when this is going to come out, so it might be a bit further down the line. But yeah, I saw the article. It's amazing.
Thanks very much.
So look, let's start from the beginning, because what Arctic Shores does is incredible. How did you come up with the idea for Arctic Shores?
It's myself and my co-founder Robert that started Arctic Shores, and we came together, having worked together previously. We knew each other well. The first things first, we'd like to work together again. That was the first thing. So that was the easy part. But we also came together wanting to do something worthwhile and to make a difference. Once we realized that, and we still, hold that dear, I suppose we each have our founder stories. And mine is what you've just heard, actually. I spent 6 years going down a path that actually, if I'd had sort of more insight and more help, I probably wouldn't have gone down that path. I have no regrets. It was an amazing education. But if I'd had a bit more insight, some help understanding what it is that I'm suited for, what it is that I'm made for, then my world would have been different. And so we, I suppose, stumbled upon this idea of thinking how we could, I suppose, measure someone's their own qualities and match them to a role in the workplace. The key thing about Arctic Shores is the way we do it isn't your sort of run-of-the-mill way. Ultimately, we're a psychometric test. And so with a psychometric test, you measure behaviors and you match those behaviors, whether it's your attitude to risk, certain mental abilities to the requirements of the role, and you work out what predicts success in the role. But the way that traditionally you do it is by asking questions. Whereas we were fascinated by the idea that you could take a task, something that was interactive. And, when we started Arctic Shores, mobile phones are really coming into their own, the smartphones. So how could we use something like a smartphone or an online experience to give a task to a candidate and understand what qualities they had and match them to the role? And that really fascinated us. So from wanting to make a difference to really trying to put the right candidates in the right roles, to working out how to do this. That's how this all came together to create Arctic Shores.
Wow. Okay. But why psychometric testing? Was it did you had bad experience with interviewing previously? Because you must have hired people through your career, I assume.
Indeed.
Yes. And had you made mistakes? And is that where it came from?
Well, did it come from that? I challenge anyone who has hired someone looking at a CV. And thinking this CV looks great, and you're looking at the experience like, oh, you worked at X, and then you have them in an interview, and you interview really well, and you get on, and then they get into the role, and it just doesn't work out. It's like, how could I have made this mistake? I challenge anyone not to have done that. So you're absolutely right. How do we take this traditional process of the CV and interview and turn it on its head? And it was all about timing. I suppose it was in the early 10s, there was a big disruption in the finance industry. There was just the start of the disruption when it came to data science. And actually, when it came to HR and hiring, the disruption hadn't started yet. In terms of assessments, the most innovative thing that had happened in assessments was to move it from pencil and paper to online. That was about it. So we were hitting the industry at just the right time to disrupt how we assess people. So absolutely, it was trying to encourage people to look past just the CV and interview, to realize that they don't really work in isolation. They introduce bias as well, and a lot of subjectivity, and to try and introduce a lot more objectivity and fairness into the process.
Wow, yeah. It's impossible not to be biased when interviewing, unfortunately, or reviewing a CV without any aids or anything like that. It is
Absolutely. Unconscious bias, as they call it. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And there's also the halo horns effect, they call it, don't they, as well? You kind of want to hire someone who's similar to yourself as well, which again is really, really tough one to get around. So yeah, incredible things that Arctic Shores are doing. So commend you, obviously. So you recently got funding, which is fantastic. What is the funding for? What are you planning to do with it? If you can tell us.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Well, we had to tell the investors what we were going to do.
Okay. Good.
So we're really pleased with what we have with our product, and we have some fantastic marquee clients. But ultimately, we need to get our message out there, and we're looking to expand. And so we have our base in the UK and in Europe mainly, and it's doubling down on that. How can we get our message even more out there? How can we gain more clients and ultimately enable as many organizations as possible to take on Arctic Shores and use our platform? So it really is about that process of getting our name out there and really building the company on the strong foundations that we have already.
I assume with Arctic Shores, the tangible saving of making the correct hire is pretty straightforward, right? Is it not? I mean, yeah, there must be so many stats out there about how much the wrong hire costs you. I mean, I know, I've seen them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point. So you're right, there's tangible savings. If you make a hire, often there's a recruitment consultancy in place, absolutely, which is absolutely, and there's a fee involved. And if you were to do that every 6 months, you're paying a fee every 6 months. So there's that sort of tangible amount that you pay. But more to the point, actually, having the wrong person in the role. You bring them in the role, you spend how many months bringing them up to speed, and then they become productive, and then they leave. So ultimately, having the wrong hire, actually, even if they don't become productive, even worse. So you have someone sitting in there not being productive, and you wanted someone in the role, and they're not. So there's that opportunity cost of not having someone in the role, which sets you back. Even worse than that is having someone in the role that ultimately disrupts everyone else in the organization because they're heading in the wrong direction. They weren't the right fit for the organization. So you've got the tangible cost, and there's certainly an intangible cost. But ultimately, there's no one who wouldn't say that having the right people in the organization is the people that make the organization. That challenge any leader not to think and say that. So there's certainly a cost of not having the right person in the role.
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer, really, and I know that it might not be a massive priority for certain businesses, obviously, but I think it just seems like a no-brainer. I'm very close to it, right? So course, it makes sense. But went out to get funding. This is your Series B,
correct?
How was it? How did you find it?
Do you know what? Getting funding's usually tough.
Yeah.
And I ask any sort of business leader about getting funding. It's tough. There's finding the funders in the first place. There is selling them on what you do. There's the due diligence and is your model, does that make sense, and your plans for the future. What's interesting is, as you said, we're now Series B, that depending on where you are in your company life cycle, whether you're early stage or late stage, the experience can be quite different. So what I'd say is that actually this experience has been very much about, let's have a look at the model. We're sold on the idea, but let's have a look at your model. Does it make sense? What are you spending on? What are your plans for the future? Whereas, in our early days, it was more about selling the dream, which can be even harder sometimes. You don't have a track record. Thankfully, we have a track record. But in the early days, it was about selling the dream and actually selling myself and Robert. Who are you and who are you? In fact, I remember the very, very first funding we got was a 25-minute conversation. And it was practically, who are you and who are you? Okay, who shall I write the check to? And it actually was a check as well.
Wow.
So a very different process. The economic backdrop obviously has changed over the last 12 months. And I'd say has made the process a little bit understatement, a bit more difficult than it has been previously. But we're super, super pleased to have closed the funding with Praetura and with Calculus, and now looking to the future.
That's such an interesting point. I think you're right, because as you said, you don't have any track record apart from your personality and your passion, and so it must be when you go into that seed round, which I assume that who should I write the check to was. It was more about, okay, how passionate are these people that I'm speaking to? How bought in are they to where this could go? But then I guess this time around it was more like, look what we've done already. This is the kind of run rate we're at, and this is where we're hoping to be.
Absolutely. You are obviously selling the team as well. I mean, ultimately, it's you have a track record, but it has to be the right team that can take that vision forward as well.
How big is your team now?
We are about 60 people. I'm not going to get the figure exactly right. It's around 60-something people.
Again, if you can tell me the plans for the next 12, 18 months, have you got headcount plans or anything like that you can tell us about?
It's partly a wait and see. We're as I said, we're looking to get sort of our message out there and the vision. So we have plans on the marketing side, plans on the sales side, some sort of smaller plans perhaps on the sort of products and technology side. So that's what we have over the next 12 months.
How did you find going from being someone who was super technical, as you admitted, to more of a kind of, well, I don't know if you are more hands-off now, I hope you are, yes. And yet to more of like just a leader and someone who's kind of overlooking things.
So that was an interesting journey. I am more hands-off now, though I've been taught this, strongly believe that actually every so often, even though you're at 30,000 foot, you need to swoop down and get your hands dirty every so often, really feel what it feels like for those that are working with you to be at the coalface. Otherwise, you can stay up here and assume, why aren't you doing this? And why? Of course, it's easy, and actually, it's not. It's really hard doing the technical stuff. So yeah, I'm mostly hands off. In terms of that transition, it happened gradually. If I think about the amount of time, which is a long time ago, since actually becoming a software developer and cutting code all the way to here, I've learned by osmosis and learned the hard way and made many, many mistakes. Hopefully, many of which I've learned from as well, and find yourself here. It's funny actually being the founder or co-founder of a company. There's nowhere to hide. So when something needs done or a decision needs making, you have to find a way to do that, whether it's yourself. Thankfully, I have a great co-founder to bounce ideas off and rely on as well, or your great team. But you have to get it done. So there's a lot of pressure, but a lot of impetus to learn as quickly as possible.
Do you think there's an advantage to coming from a technical background and then co-founding a business?
Interesting one. I'm going to sound like a Y Combinator advert now, but it's quite classic to have more than one founder. I mean, I think I was looking at the stat only this morning for Y Combinator that out of the top 100 companies they funded, only 4 had solitary founders.
Wow.
To have a co-founder, yes. In terms of having a technical co-founder, for sure. I think ultimately any founder can learn how to perhaps even to sell, to market themselves, to raise money. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying everyone can learn it, but you can learn it. I think to take a founder and to ask them to learn to code and to build a tech team is hard and would probably take a long time. A great founder could do that, but actually I think your time is better spent elsewhere, and therefore having a non-technical founder and a technical founder together, it's quite classic and makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and that's such a really good point you made there about there is such an eclectic collection of skills that you need to be a founder, and it's almost impossible, right, to have one person who has all of those, like you said, marketing, sales, recruitment, whatever it might be. Yeah, that does make sense. I mean, I originally thought it was just purely because the fact that there was so many so few solitary founders was just purely because it's hard.
Right.
It's really tough. And I can imagine, I mean, I have 2 business partners and I couldn't imagine doing what I do on my
Absolutely.
own. And you probably have that, right? You have a really bad day and you need to speak to somebody about it. And there's not many people who will understand that well what you're going through as a co-founder would.
Absolutely. Well, it's not just that as well. I mean, you need to sort of share in your joys as well. And actually, if you do that by yourself, it's like visiting somewhere by yourself, and you want to turn around and say, "Whoa, look at!" And there's no one there to share, and also share in sort of any setbacks you have as well. It just from a personal point of view, it's just so much better to be able to do that.
There was someone who was speaking to, and I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was me, Tom, Harry, the other co-founders, and they were saying, you do realize that you 3 are going to be the closest people in your entire lives, right? Because you're going through, it's like going through war with somebody. Yes. where it's these, not to trivialize war, obviously, but it's like these just unique things and you're learning as you go. Absolutely. And he was like, you 3 are going to be mates forever, or the other way is going to go and you're going to hate each other, but no.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
That's when it's war. I mean, I was going to say it's like a marriage, but I don't want to say that marriage is like war, but yeah, it is like a marriage.
Yeah.
You're quite likely to work with and see and speak to your co-founder more than you are your partner sometimes, at least in the early days or if things go well.
Yeah, really good point. So funding now, you're growing, which is amazing. You've got these fantastic products. What's the next bit that you're adding to it? What's going to be new?
I'm glad you asked that. The most exciting thing that we have around the corner is something we're calling workplace intelligence.
Awesome.
So we have created what we'd call sort of the next generation of assessments that measures candidates' mental abilities. So if you look out in the market when it comes to assessments and testing, actually the lion's share, a huge amount of it is so-called aptitude testing. What's someone's numerical reasoning ability? What's their abstract reasoning ability? And so there's lots of that in the market. The thing is that they can be practiced quite well. And if you go online, and any student will tell you this, you'll find sort of practice papers. And so there's an issue where if someone's able to practice or can afford the practice tests, they're given an unfair advantage as compared to those that maybe come from a background where they're not encouraged to do that or can't afford to do that. Also, when they're used incorrectly, they can introduce bias as well. So what we've created in this new product, Workplace Intelligence, which is out, but we've not made the splash about it yet, so the timing here is perfect, is a mechanism whereby actually it can't be practiced. It's a slightly different way of sort of measuring someone's mental abilities that doesn't tap into the same sort of in the same way as traditional aptitude tests. The great thing about it as well is in these traditional tests, what happens is you have a right and wrong answer. So you'll be presented usually with a sequence of shapes, let's say, and you'll be asked, okay, out of these 4 shapes, which is the right one, which is the next one, and you either get it right or wrong. Now, you can get close. Whereas with our new workplace intelligence, actually, we've introduced something what we call is partial scoring. So ultimately, if you get it wrong, but you were getting there, you almost got there, you will get credit for that. And so it's a much fairer test and actually a much more insightful test because you can see how far the candidate got. So really, really excited about this coming out. And actually for me, this next generation test, it's a game changer. And it's a game changer in the same way that our very first product, all those years ago, I'd put it on a par with that.
One thing people don't realize is, and we aptitude test as well, and psychometric test. People don't realize a bad score can really knock someone's confidence, right? Even if they've done a really good job, or like you said, they were almost there, they were getting there. That can really have an effect on somebody. So that partial scoring system sounds so very, very interesting. If not only to give the employer an insight into the kind of person that they could hire, where traditionally it had been a yes or no, but also just for the person being like, oh, I'm not that bad,
Absolutely.
I'm almost there.
Yeah,
that's incredible. Wow, brilliant. So, and how long? I don't know when this podcast is going to go out, to be honest, but how long are we away?
So it's out there.
Okay.
But we've not quite made the splash yet. So we're just going through. I mean, there are a few extra bits and pieces that we need to put. But it's all about sort of releasing early, but releasing quality. So we've released, but I think hopefully by the time the podcast is out, we'll be all guns blazing. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Well, look, I'm conscious of time because we could rabbit on all day. There's so much we could talk about, and a way I always like to kind of end the podcast. If today was your last day on Earth, and you mentioned a few hobbies already, and you weren't on this podcast, and you weren't spending time with family, of course. Where would you be? What would you be doing?
So in terms of where, I mean, I've been very lucky enough to travel all sorts of places in the world. My favourite place that I've visited is an island off the coast of New Zealand. And maybe that's saying something about myself. I want to be as far away from anyone as possible, not just in New Zealand, but on an island called Waiheke. It's a small island, and it's just surrounded by lots of beaches and some little coffee shops with the most fantastic coffee. And I suppose I'd like to just move from beach to beach to beach. I mentioned I grew up on the sea. I love the water. I love swimming in the sea, swimming, sailing. And so I'd be doing that, actually. It'd be great. So long as I have a computer, I can do a bit of programming.
Sure, yeah.
And there's a piano somewhere, and there's someone willing to listen to me singing, then I'm fine.
What an incredible answer. Okay, fantastic. Well, look, I'm so happy that we were able to get in the podcast. It's been such an amazing conversation. Incredible to hear that you got the funding that you were going for, and the exciting stuff that's going on at Arctic Shores. Can't wait to see where you are in 12, 18 months.
Thanks very much indeed. It's been great being on here.
And that's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Anything we talked about will be linked in the show notes, and if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we'll catch you on the next one.